Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are tuning in. Thank you so much for joining me today for this talk, Dharma talk, wisdom talk, however you want to frame that, on the topic of the inner critic. And so I'm doing a month-long series. Twice a week I'm showing up on Facebook, and when the internet is cooperative, also Instagram. And so on Mondays I do talks on loving kindness. And on Thursdays I'm doing talks on a variety of topics such as self-compassion, forgiveness, and the inner critic. And this is in Asia and Thailand where I'm living, so it might be Wednesday in some other places in the world. So anyway, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm opening 2 8-week-long meditation retreats online. The first week of October, I open the Loving Kindness course, and the second week of October, I'm opening a course entitled, you guessed it, Self-Compassion, Forgiveness, and the Inner Critic. So a little bit about the course then before we get started into today's offering. So as I mentioned, this is an 8-week online meditation program that will be quite a bit of meditating. And we will spend roughly 5 sessions on the inner critic, 5 sessions on forgiveness, and 5 sessions on self-compassion, and then 1 session to tie everything all together. So there are 16 sessions. We meet twice a week over 8 weeks. There are 2 sections. I know this gets a little confusing, so I'll try to make it as clear as possible. Section 1, it's offered from 8 to 10 p.m. on Tuesdays and Saturdays, East Coast time. 8 to 10 p.m. Tuesdays and Saturdays, East Coast time. So if you're here in Thailand, that's 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Wednesdays and Sundays. Or if you're in the Philippines, it's 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Wednesdays and Sundays. So do adjust your clocks accordingly when you're thinking about registering for the program. Try to figure your time zone into account. Also remember that there will be a time change. Most places in the world, here in Thailand we don't change the times, but many places in the world do. So make sure you factor that in as well. Section 2 is really designed to cater for people who live in Europe or who like a later start to the day here in Asia. So Section 2 is from 10 a.m. to 12 noon on Wednesdays and Sundays, Western Europe, i.e. France time. So 10 a.m. to 12 noon Wednesdays and Sundays. Here in Asia, that's 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Well, here in Thailand, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. or 4 to 6 p.m. in the Philippines. So, as I mentioned, we meet twice a week, and the sessions are all recorded over Zoom. And so many people, most of the retreat participants don't make all 16 sessions, all live sessions. Many miss several sessions. And you're welcome to do that. There's no obligation to be at the live calls. So we do record everything live on Zoom, and those recordings are made available usually maybe no more than 6 hours after the session ends. The session is up and available. So you can miss as many sessions as you want. You can miss them all if you wish. You can do the whole retreat program at your own time and your own pace. You're welcome to do that. Many people do. So don't feel obligated to make the live sessions. That being said, there is kind of a cohort vibe because each section is capped at 20 participants. Usually the retreats are quite small and we get to know each other, and it can be quite a nice energy there. Kind of a community that forms around the retreat. So if that's interesting for you, that's a bonus that seems to be forming there in the programs. So the retreat opens on Tuesday, October 11th and closes December 2nd. Again, that's in the East Coast. So here in Asia, that would be opening October 12th and closing December 3rd. The retreats include guided meditations. Pretty much every session we meet, we'll do some meditating. There will be time for Q&A and discussion. There's one-on-one sessions. I make myself available for one-on-one sessions for all of the retreat participants, free of charge. And there's lots of opportunity for discussion and to meet with your fellow retreat participants if you wish, and you can talk about your experiences together. So all of the information on this retreat, self-compassion, forgiveness, the inner critic, can be found on my website, which is www.suchsweetthunder.org. suchsweetthunder.org. Or if you Google my name, it will come up. You'll find it there. So why don't we take a few minutes just to come together. I'll ring the bell. We'll just do a brief arriving meditation practice, and then I'll move into the topic of today. And so the invitation here is just to arrive into this present moment. And we might arrive by taking a few moments just to listen to the sounds. Perhaps offering yourself an inquiry like, what does this present moment sound like? You might notice quiet, subtle sounds or loud, obvious sounds. There might be pleasant sounds or unpleasant sounds or neutral sounds. Regardless of the volume of the sound or the quality of the sound, perhaps noticing how sounds are always present moment experience. And so, if at any time we should find we're distracted by our own thoughts, we can always return back to the experience of sound. Resting. And so while we're here resting with the experience of sound, the invitation then is to bring awareness to the breath. And if it feels helpful and supportive for your practice, you might take a deep breath here. And feeling into how the breath moves through the body with the in-breath and the out-breath. Perhaps noticing the rising and falling of the abdomen, the expanding and contracting of the rib cage with each breath. We might also notice the rising and falling of the shoulders. The back moving out as you breathe in and in as you breathe out. And perhaps noticing how the temperature changes from cooler to warmer at the nose and the back of the throat with each breath. Resting, resting. So while we're here resting with this present moment experience of sound and breath, the invitation then is to bring awareness to the feet. And noticing any sensation which might be there at the feet, perhaps noticing the contact of the feet against the ground or the carpet or floor. Perhaps noticing sensations of clothing against the legs. The weight of the body against the cushion or chair or mat. There may be sensations of clothing against the back. Perhaps noticing too the hands resting against the body or touching each other. The arms resting against the body. And perhaps noticing sensations of clothing against the shoulders. Sensations arising from the back of the neck, the sides of the neck, and perhaps noticing sensations arising throughout the cheeks of the face. And noticing sensations arising from the top of the head. Resting, resting, breathing. And so in the next breath or two, we'll begin to shift away from the guided meditation and back into a conversational space. And I'll cue that by ringing the bell 3 times. All right. So thank you for joining me in that very brief opening meditation. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. So let's turn our attention now to the topic of the inner critic. And I think most people know the inner critic. We kind of have a sense of what might be being referred to when somebody says that term, the inner critic. Right? It's kind of this harsh voice, very critical voice internally. And many developmental psychologists agree, and I tend to agree with this as well, that this voice of the inner critic is often given to us by our parents or our teachers, our educators, the culture that we're born into, the society, the upbringing that we've had. That over a few years, the psychologists tend to agree that from the age roughly 2.5 to 3 to about 7, those are the years that the inner critic forms in our psyche. And, I don't think it was, this voice isn't given to us in out of malicious or anything like that. It's not done because somebody wanted to hurt us or harm us in any way, although it might seem that way sometimes. But, our parents, our teachers and so forth, they have to teach those who they're given the responsibility to teach how to conform, how to fit into our culture, how to be a part of the society that we're born into. Now, the thing is that structure that we're born into very often doesn't fit the wants, needs, or desires of a 3-year-old. Right? So then the parents or the teachers, whoever it is that they're in our company when perhaps the 3-year-old is acting out. I'm using myself as an example, so maybe I'm acting out, I'm 3 years old. Then my teacher or parent would have to push that down, say stop that. You're not behaving in a way that's appropriate. Right? That doesn't fit the culture, it doesn't fit the society, it doesn't fit this setting. And so as a youngster, as children, we take that on board. And in fact, particularly if we interpret that offering from our parents or from our teachers as being very harsh, as being very critical or pejorative in a way, that gets amplified by the mind of a 3-year-old, of a 4-year-old, of a 5-year-old. Because really our parents are all we know at that age. We typically so admire our parents. I read one scientist, evolutionary scientist, who made the real stark comparison of getting smacked by a parent as a 3 or 4-year-old is like getting smacked by God as an adult. And so you can kind of imagine, if if you were to get smacked by God right now, how might we take that on board? We'd probably be pretty careful not to do whatever we did to invite that smack, right? And so, if our parents speak to us in a harsh way, or our teachers speak to us in a harsh way, it gets amplified as we take that on board. It gets seen as whatever we did to invite that reprimand. We want to make sure we never do that again, because it feels so painful to be reprimanded at 3 years old, at 4 years old, by a parent or by a teacher. And so that's the birth of this voice called the inner critic. Now, it's often not a voice, although I'm saying it in that way for, I think, ease of understanding. But sometimes the inner critic shows up as a mood or an attitude. It's just this kind of feeling like, oh, I'm not doing this right, or I'm not doing this well, or I'm not good enough. So what's really interesting about the inner critic is that it will take an impersonal event and make it personal. So let's take the example of meditation, because I think the inner critic shows up. It shows up in my meditation practice. I think it shows up for most people who do meditate. So let's use the example of meditation. I've come to the meditation practice, and maybe I meditate for half an hour, and I felt completely distracted the whole meditation, just filled with thoughts about the future, about the past, whatever it is, about this talk on the inner critic that I'm going to give. Right? And so then the bell rings, and I'm finished the practice, and then the inner critic comes right up. Oh, I didn't do that right. Right? Or I'm not good at this. And that the inner critic, looking at the situation says, I'm not doing this right. Already we see an identification with the event, right? The event was just, I meditated for half an hour and I was quite distracted. That's the empirical evidence. That's the event. Now the inner critic will take that event of a distracted meditation into, I'm not doing this right. And before long, it goes from I am not doing this right to I am not right, or I am wrong, or I can't meditate, or I've been doing this for 37 years, I should be better now. Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of Nonviolent Communication, has a great quote. He says, should is the most violent word in the human language. Should is the most violent word in the human language. Because it really puts this kind of, I'm not acceptable, is basically what that says. So one of my teachers offered this retranslation of phrases around should. So let's use this example of, I really should eat better. Let's translate to, maybe I would feel better if I was more mindful about my diet. Or, I really got to go work out. You can translate that to, perhaps I would feel better if I exercised more. I really should be studying right now. Maybe it would feel better if I had better study habits. You see how those land? And it's interesting with the inner critic, right? That we are kind of, we listen more or less, or at least we accept the tone of the inner critic in that really harsh way. When if we had a friend who spoke to us like that, we would totally disregard them, right? If I had a friend who said to me, Chris, you really should practice more. Right? You really should be more focused during meditation. How come you're so distracted? Right? If I had a friend who said that to me, I'd show them to the door. I certainly wouldn't take on their advice. And, this is kind of, in a sense, the irony of the inner critic, because it has that harsh tone that we would never accept from a friend, but we seem to be okay when it's coming from our own head. Right? But because it's so harsh, we never really take the time to extract the wisdom from it. Very often the inner critic has some nugget of wisdom, right? So if, I go to the meditation, I'm very distracted, can't feel my breath, can't feel my body, whatever, my mind is racing. And then the inner critic says, how come you can't do this already? You've been meditating for so long and you're so distracted again. Why is this, okay. So it's very challenging to listen to that. If that's running in my mind, more often than not, I'd be like, okay, stop. Kind of disengage with that. But maybe we can turn and actually listen to what the inner critic is offering. So there's a method around this, and I usually offer this as a journaling practice. So first we recognize, okay, there's the inner critic, and even if it's just a mood, even if it's just this energy of, again, right? That's okay, we can work with that, right? So first we want to offer our self-compassion. And this is one of the reasons why I'm offering the course, Self-Compassion, Forgiveness, the Inner Critic, is these are all intimately tied together, I think, as you'll see if you join the course. So we offer our self-compassion. Oof, wow, that's challenging to hear. However that lands for you. I like to put my hand on my heart and offer a phrase or two of compassion for myself when the inner critic is running. And then we can actually turn to the inner critic and offer the inner critic compassion. Wow, sounds like you're really upset. Are you upset because we were distracted during the meditation the whole time? And then once we've listened to the inner critic, we actually might speak a little bit closer to what the inner critic's looking for. We could say, are you upset because you wanted a good meditation this morning? Offering a guess, an empathy guess. Always ending it as a question rather than a statement. So it's open, so we don't feel like we have to have been feeling that. Then we say, okay, what are the facts? What actually happened? We know the story, right? The story is, you can't meditate, you're not a good meditator, you've been doing this so long, how can you be teaching that you're not authentic? So on, right? That's the story. What actually happened that set the inner critic in motion? I sat and meditated for about a half an hour, and I had a lot of thoughts. I was quite distracted. Okay, those are the facts. And so we can clearly see here, okay, the inner critic is upset about this set of facts. Why? What is the inner critic needing or valuing? What's the wisdom that the inner critic is pointing to? Well, it sounds like there was a lot of distraction there. Perhaps we didn't get enough sleep last night. And we can start to develop a strategy around how we might be more available and more focused during our meditation sessions. We can trace our steps, what led up to the meditation. As I was saying, did we have good sleep? Did we have good breakfast? Or maybe we ate too much, maybe we had too much caffeine, maybe not enough caffeine, so forth. So we can start to strategize. Okay, here the inner critic is really just asking us to be more attentive in our meditation practice. I mean, most teachers would ask us to do the same thing, right? Yeah. So it's just a process of listening to the inner critic, offering our self-compassion, offering the voice of the inner critic compassion as well, and then distilling the facts out of the storyline. The facts won't be critical. The facts are usually pretty neutral, right? But it's the stories that the inner critic latches on to the facts. That is where the critique comes, the harshness comes. That's what makes the voice of the inner critic so hard to listen to, right? We just want to close the door on it. But, in many cases, if we just simply disconnect from the inner critic, we are, in a way, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Right? So very often the inner critic can have something we could use. Not always, for sure, not always. And at another Facebook Live, I will be talking perhaps about what to do in those situations when we encounter the inner critic, but the inner critic isn't really offering us something we can learn from. Sometimes the inner critic arises as just a repetitive voice with the same story that we've heard since we were, 10 years old or something like that. And there are techniques where we can separate from that and let that go as well. Again, involving self-compassion, perhaps forgiveness as well. But that'll be for another session, another time. So I think that's all I've got to offer today. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found that helpful and perhaps informative. If you ever have any questions around this practice or anything about meditation, please always feel free to email me through my website, suchsweetthunder.org, or you could post them here on Facebook underneath the video in the comment section, or you could message me directly if that's more helpful for you. So, thanks again, and I will hopefully see you on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone. I'll ring the bell to make it official. Thank you.